Veterinarians and techs, what are your horror stories? Here is one. At the time, I was a registered tech in a daytime general practice. It is noonish, when we usually do surgeries. I go up to reception to ask them something, when a guy rushes in with his dog in his arms. The man is covered in blood, in a panic. "Please help him," he says to me, and the guy looked like he was about to pass out. I took the dog from him, blood from the dog's towel soaking into my scrub top, into my undergarments. I rushed the dog back to the treatment area, shouting for a doctor, stat. Get him onto a treatment table and have my coworkers help me. He was a border collie mix, very cute. He was shocky and whining, disoriented. We grab oxygen, we grab a crash cart. I then pulled back the towel, and saw what happened to him. He looked, kind of like when you are half done eating a steak. There were rips and tears taken out of his lumbar area and hind legs. About a square foot of skin and tissue was just gone. There was bone, spinous processes, iliac crests, ligaments, nerves, man, everything was showing. I felt wobbly, but promptly just covered it back up and focused. I threw in 4 catheter in him faster than I think I have ever done before. The vet comes in, they were in surgery, and realizes that it was an emergency and what is going on, okays us to continue traumatic shock therapy. The owner is up front with the reception staff helping him, getting water, etc. He was exhausted, had run about a half-mile from his home with his dog in his arms, because he didn't have a vehicle. I can only imagine what people thought seeing him run. When he caught his breath, they brought him back, and he explained to us what happened. Simple thing, really. So stupid. 3 dogs and 1 bone. That is all that started it. They were all his dogs, had them all since they were little. The 2 bully breed dogs went after the border collie mix after he was given a steak bone. They ripped him up. And the owner said they looked like they were starting to eat him. He had to fend off the 2 other dogs with a baseball bat, and was able to scoop him up and run to us. The dogs had never fought before. Never any inclination of such a possibility. There was so much damage. We bolused 4 fluids and gave a dose of morphine while the vet spoke with the owner about what we could do. There were virtually no reflexes in the hind legs, conscious or otherwise, the damage was so extensive, and the wounds were enormous and contaminated. The owner had very little money. He didn't even have a car. He couldn't afford to treat him, only had about $100. So he made that hardest of choices, and we euthanized his dog. We put his poor dog to sleep, and everyone was just sad and stunned. The entire thing happened over about 10 minutes. The owner left and returned about 30 minutes later with his other 2 dogs. The ones. They had blood everywhere. He couldn't live with what they did. He wanted us to put them down too, and we couldn't really argue with that. He paid and left, looking like the most haunted shell of a man I had ever seen. I helped with one of the 2 dogs. She was the cutest pit Thai ever, petite and tan and white. She wanted to lick my face, but there was dried blood on her face. Her breath smelled like raw meat. She was sedated and euthanized, and the whole time only wanted to lick me and be petted. So there is a horror story. How did I cope? I guess it helped that all of us were so affected. Even my boss, who had practiced for over 25 years and served in Vietnam, was shocked by the condition of the dog. Many of us were crying that day. I went to the back to swap out my scrubs, throwing my bloody laundry in the machine, and cried for a good long while. I went home and told my husband what had happened. He consoled me, and helped me by reminding me that at least we were there to help him, that the dog had some pain relief, and was able to pass on quietly and quickly instead of suffering. That was probably about 7 years ago, and it still haunts me. There are some things that just stick with you. I'm a second year, but when I was working at a small clinic in undergrad I had an experience that made me sick for a while. I was in an exam room helping with a client, something routine, like vaccinations. We had just wrapped up and I was stepping out so I could take the chart up to reception. What was waiting for me outside the exam room door was a tidal wave of shit smell. I've smelt some terrible things over the years between my time working at a body farm, guano research lab, and a feedlot, but this day was definitely in the top 5 worst. Anyways, I tried to play it off and walk up to the counter, and noticed our receptionist was clearly suffering as well. Once I gathered my bearings and suppressed the urge to puke, I picked out the culprit. A man sitting on our bench with a dog standing on its front 2 legs with its hind legs trailing out behind it like they didn't work. I felt bad for this dog, matted fur and obviously old. The worst part is that there was a trail of foul-smelling substance from the door to where the man had drug his dog. Okay, so the dog evacuated itself, no big deal. I thought. Wrong, very big deal. Once I manned up and got the dog into an exam room and up on the table, we noticed that there were maggots all over the back half of the dog. It hadn't shit itself like I thought, instead it had anal sac adenocarcinoma and the tumors had gone unnoticed, untended, and untreated so long that they had ruptured. This poor dog had been left outside with flies constantly visiting its sores, unable to get away or inside and immobilized by the pain it was in. The owner stated that the dog was fine the day before and asked if we could give him a cream for it. My boss told him he was going to pay to have the dog put down and then leave before we called him in for neglect. I've been working as a tech for the last 8 years, and I have definitely seen a few things that cannot be unseen. My first tech job, which I started freshman year of college, was at the county-funded animal shelter in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which was the only non-privately run shelter for the surrounding 3 counties and the only place that had to take anything brought in. Legally, they couldn't turn away animals like the little private rescue shelters can, so sometimes it was literally overflowing. I've seen dogs with mange so severe they were completely hairless, fighting pits and mangled bait dogs, feral dogs that were scary as hell and looked at you like a wild animal does, and a corgi so obese that he was just paws sticking out of a fur blob. His owner, who died of obesity-related illness, of course, had been feeding the dog cornbread and buttermilk for the last 10 years. During bad parvo outbreaks it wasn't unusual to lose 20 to 30 dogs in a single day. Once we had animal control bring in about 30 cats that had been locked in an abandoned trailer for who knows how long. Needless to say, these cats were not quite right in the head. The adult male cats nursed on the mother cat and wouldn't eat food. Later in college, I worked at a clinic that catered to, let's just say, the lower-income pet owner demographic. Lots of fighting pits there, often with horrific injuries. There was one that came in with half his bottom jaw ripped off. Like, bone, skin, everything. He looked really weird. We once treated a dog whose owner had decided a suicide-dogicide sounded like a good time. He'd shot his poor dog in the head, then chickened out and called a hotline instead of shooting himself. Dog lived. Also lots of embedded collars, parvo, prolapses that had gone untreated way too long, and the occasional distemper case. The one thing I absolutely cannot deal with. Cuterebra worms. Ugh, I have the shivers just thinking about them. I get all lightheaded and stuff if I try to take one out. No bot flies here please, send those to Banfield. Not a horror story, but more of a story about an owner neglecting to bring their animal. When I began working as a vet technician last year, there was a couple who brought in their sick cat. The initial information we were given said the cat had been sick for a few days. Come to find out the vomiting, shortness of breath, discharge coming out the nose were all happening for about a month. Oh, we thought he'd get better with time, maybe it would pass if he passed out from lack of oxygen. Instead of taking him to a vet closer and having the cat endure less stress from the car ride, they took him to our vet about an hour away. When the cat gets there we look at it, the poor thing already looks like it's dying at the time. So we take it in the back to work on it, to draw some blood and see what is possible wrong. The cat is already stressed, so taking it away from the owners while we did this. The doctor stuck the needle in the jugular vein of the cat. Sorry, don't know the medical term just yet. The cat began to die on the table. I have never been more angry at someone who owns an animal, being that you have a responsibility to this animal to take care of it. Our vet is relatively inexpensive. It is a rural vet, and does not cost much for a checkup or anything. So if you had any concerns, why not bring it closer? The woman is crying in the vet office, almost howling. But as soon as she walks outside, stops and is just all happy all of a sudden. It's all in the past and there is nothing I can do about it now. That's my horror story of my time working as a vet tech.